Hi, everyone. I'm just letting everyone know. I'm going to mute everyone for now. Just to make everything easier. And then I'll introduce everyone. If you are new to Zoom, you'll figure it out. But one thing that we will use is there's a chat function. If you look on the bottom bar, you'll see it says chat. And you can always put something in there in the chat function. And if you can, and I'm going to just, I'll show people. You can see, and you can send questions or comments at any point to any of us through chat. Okay. Just gonna. So thanks for joining us in these really tricky times. I was emailing with someone today, and they said something to the extent of, it's nice to know that we are Beth Am, house of the people, even if we don't necessarily have a house to go to. I thought that was a very powerful statement. And then she followed up with the idea of, yet we will soon be back into our house. And so that will be very powerful as well. Sorry, one second. Okay. So I think you'll be able to see me a little bit better now. And we're joined by two terrific Beth Am members, or lots of terrific Beth Am members, but we're asked two terrific Beth Am members to be part of this conversation. One of them is Jonathan Leff. Jonathan, will you speak up so people can see who you are? Say something. You're unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Wonderful to be here.
So Jonathan's been a Beth Am member for about 8 years, 10 years. He has two twin daughters that are juniors in high school. And Jonathan is a doctor. He's a pulmonologist, and has been willing to offer some of his thinking. He isn't going to be able to answer specific medical questions for obvious reasons, but some of his broader thinking about who we are in this place that we're in. So it's terrific to have you, Jonathan. And then we have one of our past presidents, Amy Asin. Amy, will you speak up so you pop up into people's screen?
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you.
So my hunch is a lot of people know Amy. Amy's past president of Congregation Beth Am, has two children, and currently serves as the vice president of the Union of Reformed Judaism, working specifically with congregations. She knows synagogues better than any other person in the entire country. I don't know if there's statistics around that, but I'm pretty sure it's accurate.
There's actually a March Madness tourney every year, and I win. So
yeah, so with no NCAA March Madness, Amy will win as the knowing synagogues better than anyone else in the entire country. So it's just a delight to be here with so many people to sort of engage in this sacred conversation. So for some of you who have been to a Beth Am meeting, if you've been to Torah study, sometimes we start with a blessing for Torah. But there's also a blessing that sometimes our board meeting starts with, or our program team starts with, and it's the blessing for serving the community. So it's very similar to the blessings that you know, and it ends with the words La'asok b'tzorkei hatzibor, for the blessings of working with our community. And so I was hoping that everybody, even though you're muted, could join me in those words. If you don't know it, you can just say amen at the end. And as we sort of recognize that this is a sacred coming together in any way possible. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav tivanu la'atzot etzorkei hatzibor. So I'm going to start off moderating a little bit of a conversation between Amy and Jonathan, and then we'll have some time for questions. If you have any specific questions, please add them just to the chat bar on the side, and that will be the best way for us to have the questions. And then if there's any other thing that comes up at any point, we can unmute people if need be, but it's just so nice to see so many people here. So Jonathan, I'll just start with you. And this is sort of the most basic question that we can think of. How are you doing? How are you? How's your family? What's on your mind?
Well, we're doing okay. We're trying to treat this like an adventure. This is going to be something we'll tell stories about many, many years from now, looking back on it. We're spending time together, obviously. We're following all of the CDC and the local health advisory best guidances, which is to stay indoors unless it's urgent that you be outside. But you can go outside, walk a dog, take a nice walk and a stroll, even with other people if you keep your distance. So we're spending a lot of time together in the house. You mentioned both my daughters are at Kehila Jewish High School. They're sophomores. One of them, interestingly, Sophie, was spending a year abroad in Italy, of all places. And of all places in Italy, she was spending time and living in Bergamo, which is the epicenter of all the problems in Italy now, with just explosive outbreaks. But we were able to extricate her. And last Friday, late at night, she arrived on a plane from Rome through Newark to San Francisco. So all four of us are now here, spending time together, trying to stay healthy in ways we can talk about. Doing well. I think you might be muted.
Amy, you know people, you've been talking to synagogues and you've been talking to presidents and you've been talking to rabbis and you've probably been talking to pastors and reverends and priests and people that I can't even imagine. How are you holding up on a personal level?
I am finding that keeping busy for me is the best thing to do. And I don't know how all you all felt, but I like to get outside on the weekends. I like to, especially on Shabbat, go for a hike. And I think that God conspired this weekend to bring rain to Northern California and cold weather. And that was particularly tough. So, I will admit, I've had my moments. I've had my moments of fear, and I've had my moments of great concern. And what I'm really blessed with is, as we all are, we're demonstrating it tonight, is a community of support. And sometimes the helpers need to be helped, and we've got doctors and therapists and all sorts of people on this call that are helping, that think of themselves as helpers. They need help too. So that's part of my job, is to take the call from the rabbi or the synagogue president who just found out that they had an exposure in their congregation and they're panicking and they don't know what to do. We've trained or given Zoom discounts to hundreds of congregations so that they can be doing this kind of work, and just giving them ideas for things to do, and even just a guide to the questions they should be asking. Because we in Santa Clara County were so early on in this, Beth made the decision to cancel our Purim festivities 2 weeks ago. And I know that so many people were disappointed. And as my husband quoted to me, what was once unthinkable becomes likely, and then inevitable, and then obvious. And so part of my job is helping to take congregational leaders through those stages as this happens across North America.
Is anyone doing, how are our other Jewish brothers and sisters doing? Especially I'm thinking about communities everywhere from Seattle and the heart of some of this outbreak, and also to communities that, we're probably, as you just alluded to, might be like a week or 10 days or 2 weeks behind us.
Yeah, I think most communities at this point have shut down Shabbat services. They're dealing with canceling B'nai Mitzvah and those kinds of things. The big question that's on everybody's mind right now, and I imagine it's on everybody's mind on this call, is Passover. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about Passover? So our communications team right now is working on trying to figure out how to support our community to have virtual seders should we need them, and my guess is we will. And we know that we can do it. We'll figure that out. Canada, I was on a call this afternoon with a rabbi in Canada who said they feel like they're a week behind the US. I guess it depends on what part of the US. We had congregations in Florida that were holding services this past weekend. So it's everybody's in a different place. We have 200 or 300 early childhood centers at congregations. Most of them are shut down at this point. And one of the big questions that every congregation is wrestling with, and we are all, I hope you are all wrestling with this individually, is there's so many people in our lives who are making minimum wage or worse. What do we do about paying our preschool teachers when we shut down schools? How about our religious school teachers? How about the janitorial staff? How about, if you were blessed enough to have somebody come to your house to clean and they can't come anymore, are you able to pay them? Can you just say, hey, I'm not going to save money off of my housekeeper's back, or my hair cutter, or all of the people in our lives? And for me, reaching out and doing those things has actually, I think, in some ways saved me. It's been one of the things that I felt like, okay, this is a reflex. I learned this going to Torah study. I learned that this is what we do, and I've developed this reflex, and I'm going to do it, and it makes me feel human and normal to reach out to those people. So,
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Super powerful. If anybody has any thoughts about actions that they take, specifically for them as part of self-care, put them in the chat and we can read them and everybody can see them. There's some good ideas there. Jonathan, that was very powerful about what you said about your daughter coming home. I can only imagine how you and Mary Beth were thinking about that, having her in Italy. And so certainly to recognize that even though you're one of the blessed to be part of the medical profession, how much it hits you as well. I mean, on a personal level and a family level, and to never be able to sort of, forget that, as that the people that are working on the front lines are family members and are doctors, and they have family members and they have parents and they have children. So certainly a very powerful moment for me to hear that. I'm glad that she's home. I'm glad that you're able to be with her. I'm sure your twins will get right back at each other really quickly. That will probably take a couple minutes before they're at each other's throat again. I know your focus is pulmonology and respiratory ideas, but do you have any thoughts specifically about, when we think about how we care for ourselves? You gave out some, take a walk, go outside, walk the dog. But in terms of sort of as we approach our days, I find it's very hard not to get consumed with the news, to not be in the SF Chronicle or nytimes.com, to not to listen to NPR. And I think on some level that's important, but I do think you can overwhelm yourself with that. I'm just curious if you had any specific thoughts about those things, whether just on a personal level or a little bit in terms of sort of the medical idea of what you think about too.
Yeah, so on a personal level, as a physician, I feel I'm obligated to kind of keep up to date on these things and what are the local guidance updates from local health authorities or the CDC. But on the other hand, for most of us, it can absolutely be overload and it can cause a lot of stress. And I've heard a lot of people say, tune out from the news, enough is enough. Every day or two, check in, get the latest, but don't be consumed by it. Instead, be consumed by other things that are happy, that keep you, distracted. And maybe it's a time to, rediscover an old hobby, cross stitch or needlepoint, or a book that you've been meaning to read, or catch up on a TV series that have wanted to watch but haven't, and distract yourself in happy ways, and use this as an opportunity. Obviously, you need to stay healthy. Um, Put a lot of thought and concentration into what that means for you. But certainly it means, eating well at the very least, getting plenty of sleep, keeping your immune system as healthy as it can possibly be, lots of hand washing. Exercise is critical when you're feeling stressful. And that can mean anything from, vigorous exercise in your house where you draw a sweat, or even just a casual walk outdoors, walking your dog, or even taking a hike. We're allowed to do that. Even if you do it with another person, keep your distance. And you're absolutely allowed to do that. Fresh air does wonders. And you realize how lucky we are. I mean, we're going to get through this, absolutely. There's no question about that. And even when times seem like they are bleak, realize how fortunate we all really are. We're all at home, for one. Many people are not. We all have computers, obviously, and the trappings of, luxury. We're on video calls, using technology. I mean, life is good. It's phenomenal. And the more we remember that, I think the better.
Thanks, Jonathan. I know that we're not going to go deep into sort of a medical idea or the medical conversations, but as a pulmonologist and as somebody who knows sort of the respiratory issues specifically, is there anything specifically in terms of our breathing that we should be thinking about or looking out for at this time?
Well, I think most important is we should be absolutely committed to all the social distancing and all the closures that are going on now. As inconvenient and as extreme as they may appear, I can almost guarantee you that a month or two from now, when we look back at what we're doing, now we're thinking it's extreme and over the top and crazy, but 2 months from now, looking back on it, we will be relieved that we did what we did, and maybe even wonder, why didn't we do more quicker? So this is absolutely the right thing to do. Some of you might be familiar with the 1918 Spanish flu, and there were two cities that took very different approaches. Philadelphia didn't really deploy any social distancing or closing of work or businesses, and they had a huge spike that overwhelmed the health system and then eventually came down after, unfortunately, a lot of mortality. St. Louis, on the other hand, took some very, very urgent and strict measures. And you saw in St. Louis a very nice smoothing out of the curve. And it was really very, very dramatic. It had a dramatic impact. But the point is, when you're going through it, you don't know that. I mean, there are still more and more infections every day. You don't realize you're part of the smoothing curve that could have been a sharp peak. So what we're doing is absolutely important. It's important that we're all committed to it and we follow the rules. They're coming from very experienced people who've been through this before.
Thanks, Jonathan. Amy, I'm going to turn back to you for a second. One of the Jewish texts that I've been thinking about a lot these days is the story of Miriam being banished from the camp. And for some of you who don't remember this, it's the story of, the story is Miriam and Aaron were considered gossips, and they got this leprosy, this idea of sara'at is the word in the Torah. And we don't exactly know what sara'at, some sort of affliction, some sort of skin disease, some sort of leprosy, but on some level it doesn't even matter. But what happens is that Miriam is forced out of the camp. And some people think that, some of the rabbis think she's forced out of her camp as a sort of punishment, right? She shouldn't have been gossiping. She shouldn't have been speaking ill of her brother. And some people think she was forced out of the camp simply because she was needed time to heal away from the community. It's a powerful story, but the thing that I find always most powerful about this story is that the camp waited for her. Right? Though during the wandering, the camp didn't go on without her and say, oh, that's okay, Miriam will catch up. Even though she was banished from the community, she stayed there and the camp waited until she was well. This happened to be only a week for Miriam and who knows, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for our community. But I've been thinking about that section of the Torah a lot. Amy, I'm wondering if there's any sort of the Jewish tradition, Jewish stories, Jewish ritual that you've, on a personal level, have found meaningful, or that you've seen others that have found meaningful. And Jonathan, I don't know if that impacts you as well, if you've thought about that, but I'll give you the chance to think after Amy as well.
I think you're muted, Amy.
All right, Amy, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, even with that text that you just talked about, some of you who I know well know that I didn't really come to Judaism until I was in my early 30s. And I remember studying Torah for the first time in the library at Beth with Rabbi Block and thinking, so much of this is just not relevant to our world. Judaism was built in some ways for a crisis, and we're not in crisis. We're in America in the 20th, at the time it was the 20th century, and I'm in the suburbs, and it's pretty good. And of course, I've had tragedy in my life, and all of us have had tragedy and pain. But so much of what we go to Judaism for has been existential. It's been about meaning and purpose, and not about survival. And so it's texts like that right now that I'm just amazed at how much more meaning they have. Not just that the camp didn't leave, but that there was a way, in many of our texts that talk about having to leave the walled city, there's a way for the person to come back in, right? And that we really think about that. I've got my hit list of texts that I rely on. Psalm 27 is something that I go to year round. It's mostly during the month of Elul, but for me, it's a year round top 10. The piece that we use at High Holy Days, the last line of Adon Olam, Adonai li velo ira, has always been, and that means Adonai, God will be with me. I don't have to be afraid, to paraphrase. And that's all, like, even on Shabbat, I think about that. And I think that's a really important text for me right now. And I had the opportunity to actually post a blessing that I wrote. I'll copy it into the chat if folks want to take a look at it. But I think that for me, it reminds me that Judaism is about hope and about drawing strength and drawing courage. And we all have different theologies. I know there are some very proud atheists on the screen today. And I don't necessarily think that this is about, it can be about God. It doesn't have to be about God. It's about finding that well, where whatever fills that well for you. And so whether it's, Psalm 27, Psalm 120, 121, I look to, where do I look for help? I look to the mountain. I look to Adonai. These little pieces, the story of Joseph, there have been moments when I've thought about Joseph in the pit, and the pit was empty, and Joseph couldn't find solace in the pit, and then somehow he got out and he transformed. there are moments over the past couple of weeks where I felt like, oh my God, I'm in that pit. So I, you know, there's another one that's kind of my hopeful text. Some of these are kind of where I go in despair, but my hopeful text is Ma'ariv Aravim. And you know how we sing, roll into dark, roll into light. And whenever we sing that prayer, I think about the fact that I don't need to make the sun rise, and I don't need to make the sun set. It's going to rise and it's going to set. And I have to do my part, but I don't have to make it rise and set. I don't have to hold all the responsibility of the world on my shoulders. And so I think, to me, that's something in this moment also. I got to do my part. And as Jonathan Leff said, it's really clear what our part is right now. Yeah. But that's all I can do. That's all I can do.
Thanks, Amy. That's super powerful. I mean, I was thinking the Adon Olam text that you talked about, B'ya'ado afkid rechid ve'et ishan ve'a'ira v'im rechi geviati Adonai li belo ira. Like, that's actually the way that, for those of you who attend Saturday morning Shabbat, that's sort of the meditation that I like to end every Shabbat service with. I find that very powerful, and I appreciate what you said, whether you believe in God or whether you don't, or whether you question. Into God's hands I put my spirit and my body too. When I lie down and when I wake, God is with me and I shall not fear. My thinking on this just a little bit is, on some level, this is just a side piece of advice, I wouldn't worry about finding the perfect mantra, the perfect reading, the perfect text. Whatever feels right for you in the moment. Oftentimes people say to me, like, can I say the healing prayer for X? Or can I say this at this time of day? And my answer to that is always yes. And if you feel like this is something that's part of your vocabulary and part of your language, I think that's super important, just to seize whatever that is, whether it's the Debbie Friedman Mishaberach, or anything else at any time that you want to bring to it. I think those are really important ideas.
Yeah, I also just want to, there's a lot of great content on the internet right now. If you are at home and you don't have access to a prayer book or a Tanakh, a copy of the Hebrew Bible, the Central Conference of American Rabbis has published an online version for free of our prayer book. Not the Beth version, but the Mishkan Tefillah version. If you go on to reformjudaism.org, there are all sorts of resources. So if you want to experiment,
and Beth will send out all those links. Cantor Jamie's going to be leading some singing, some both healing and just some song session type ideas in the coming days. We're going to continue having programming on Zoom and in other places. We're going to have specific things targeted at teenagers. If you have a teenager in your family, or they don't have to be connected to Beth that we're going to be, so Molly and Rabbi Heath are going to work on. So we are sort of going to continue to populate. Jonathan, whether it's Jewish or not, when you think about, is there anything that continues that gives you strength in terms of the work you do, or when times are tough for you, or when angst overruns you? And if the answer is no, that's okay. We won't hold it against you. So, yeah.
I think as a physician, I come to this with a feeling of some extra obligations. Certainly as a Jew, this is a time for all of us to stick together. And, the Jewish people have had community that has held them instead through the most dreadful of times. And it's times like this when you realize the importance of community. What we're doing here, even though we're not meeting physically, we're communicating with each other, we're being creative, we're hopefully drawing strength from each other, and that's really important. In terms of other Jewish values, mitzvot, this is a time to do the right thing, to not only look after your friends and your family, but maybe your neighbor, especially if your neighbor is elderly, and even more so if they live alone. Of course, whether or not they're Jewish, pick up a phone, see how they're doing, give them a call, reach out and extend the community beyond the normal bounds. Certainly as a physician, I feel like I have some extra obligations. I mean, if there's a run on the hospitals and it's, everyone, all hands on deck, I would, of course, do my part, even though I'm not a practicing physician now. I would don the stethoscope and rush in and do my part. And I would take great meaning in that, actually, as doing the right thing in the right moment for the community.
Yeah. Do you have any advice about, I know you have teenage daughters, and so they might not listen to anything you say, but do you have any advice about talking to, kids, talking to other family members about sort of the whole, both in terms of actually like the, coronavirus, COVID-19, but also in terms of, how do we respond to this as a community or in the medical system as well?
Well, I think talking is important. So even if you're, scared and nervous, it's even more important to talk about it. It's okay to be scared. There's a lot of unknowns out there, but there's a lot that we know as well. So just voicing it sometimes can ease some of the stress and the tension. And it's okay. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. We're all nervous and scared, but talking is good. And there's resources out there. If you can't find the answer, ask one of us. We can either answer it for you or point you in the right direction. But it's okay to talk, and I would highly encourage it.
Yeah, and that's a great plug for, if Beth can be of help in any point, we want to be part of that conversation or help direct that, both in terms of the Beth clergy, but also in terms of, Beth has a very broad and talented community of really caring people, whether they're including trained social workers and trained therapists. We've started a program where we're just reaching out to people to check in. But sometimes I feel like people are so eager to reach out and so eager to keep busy that they forget about themselves. So if you are a person that also would like to talk to anyone, we are happy to set that up and to be part of that, those programs and those resources as well. And we will certainly share through the various means, through emails, through the Facebook page, through the Beth web page, in other ways, any of the resources that we see that we can have. Who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? My son just walked in. Amy, I'm gonna get this is
Co-moderator.
Yeah, co-moderator. So, Jonathan, there was one just logistical question, and then I just want to give it over Amy again. Somebody asked a specific question about vitamin D. If people are staying more inside, do we think that's a good thing, or do you think that's supplements if people are getting less sunshine? Trying to unmute you, Jonathan. There you go.
There we go. So that's a little bit of a tricky one. So many of us who don't get enough sun exposure can become vitamin D deficient. And vitamin D is very important for your active immune system and body surveillance and fighting autoimmune diseases and creating healthy bones. So enough vitamin D is absolutely critical. And sunlight causes vitamin D to be formed in your blood in the active form. So if we are cooped up inside and we're not getting sun, we could become vitamin D deficient. On the other hand, you can have too much vitamin D, and you can have vitamin D toxicosis. So you don't want to be, popping all kinds of vitamin D. But in general, if you take a multivitamin, most of the multivitamins have vitamin D supplementation in them. And for the majority of us, the great majority of us, that's probably enough. And this is certainly not a time to be going to the doctor and asking for your vitamin D level to be drawn, because you could, of course, dictate your therapy by your exact level, but they're distracted with many other things and urgencies. So now is not the time to do that. So a simple multivitamin with vitamin D supplementation should be adequate for most of us.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. One of the things that I was thinking about, and I read someplace today in the Jewish idea, is this idea, and I think you alluded to this, Jonathan, is about like, how are we protecting the most vulnerable? And the person used this story of Amalek, right? And they used the story of Amalek, who famously who attacked the Jews from the behind. So he was able to attack the weaker members of our community. And so I love the image of the fault a little bit was on the Israelites during the wandering. It was certainly on Amalek. But one of the things that we need to ensure is that we have the most vulnerable in the center of our community. Obviously, we don't want the most vulnerable in the center in a physical sense, but in an emotional sense, the way that we are thinking about others and we're reaching out. The other day after Shabbat services, I encourage people just to go into their phone and maybe find someone that they haven't talked to in a long time, an aunt or a cousin or an old neighbor, and reach out to them. I did it. I spoke to my great aunt in Delaware the other day, and just found that like hadn't spoken to her in a while, gave her a call. It felt good for me. I hope it felt good for her as well, but it is a way that we can continue to reach out to people. Amy, you have thoughts on how the reaching out is going, and if there's specific ways that we can, creative ways that we can do the reaching outing?
I think the neighborhood thing is really interesting. And in my neighborhood, there's, because my husband set it up, there's a listserv for our block, and the various people on the block have volunteered to go get groceries. So that if you're 80 years old and you're more at risk to go out into public, there's somebody younger on the block who will go and do that for you. So I think that's good. I will say I've talked to my family more in the past week than I probably have in the 6 months before that. We had on Shabbat morning, we had an Asin family Zoom, and there are free Zoom accounts out there. 40 minutes, you get 40 minutes free of Zoom, and we had everybody on the call, and that was really nice. We had so various things like that. I think are really good. And Rabbi, I know you're looking forward to a big moment in your life, in your family's life, coming up in the next couple of weeks. And I know everybody on the call wants to send you and Aaron and the boys good health and b'sha'a tova, in the right time, is what we say in Judaism. I don't know if you want to report in from your own household and how you're coping.
Yeah. For those who don't know that, I feel a lot of people know, but we're expecting our third child the first week of April. The the due date is Seder night. So we're feeling, part of us is super excited and part of us is very nervous. I think for some of us, the idea of even going to the hospital at any point when the baby comes will be hard. We've encouraged Aaron's parents not to come and visit us after the baby was born at this point, which is also very hard, both emotionally, and somebody has to spend time with our two demon children. So how do we respond to them? It could be very tricky. But we do think that there's, joy. I do think, I was studying the other morning with some people for Torah study, some of the words of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who was famously, we think of as the Gesher Tsar Me'od, for the whole world is a bridge, a very narrow bridge. But he also sort of said that, we should always be joyful. And people often push back at that, sort of, that's not realistic. There's no way to always be joyful. And I agree that it's not realistic to always be joyful. But I do think that what Rabbi Nachman might have been talking about was a little bit about of a disposition of joy. And even though fear is real, and we don't want to panic and we don't want to ignore the reality, um, but there is, we don't want to frighten ourselves, and we don't want to frighten the other ones that we love with. So that disposition of joy, I think, is a really big deal. And so that's something that we're approaching with. And as we feel the baby kick and we get excited for the next couple weeks, we're trying to approach things with a disposition of joy in all that we do. And I also think for the Beth community, certainly would have never hoped that this happened. We know it's a real inconvenience, and we're certainly really worried about people getting sick. I think there have been people coming together in a way that I never would have ever anticipated. I think it's challenged us to be a little bit more creative, which is a good thing. It's also brought people together. There's brought a lot of more intergenerational work together. I sent out a SEDIC update today, and people from all over responded. So I do think that it's asking us to think about what is congregation, what does it mean to be a house of a people in ways that we wouldn't have originally anticipated. And I think that, as Jonathan said, we will get through this, and this will help build a more dynamic and loving and caring community. I lived in New York on September 11th, 2001. Both of my grandparents were there. We're in Manhattan. I had a job interview in lower Manhattan that day. I remember that day so clearly. But I also remember like how much people came together, how much New Yorkers came together after that moment. And I do think that it's more communal on some level, but where we have the opportunities to seize that. And I do think that the whole world is a narrow bridge. And the key thing is to not be afraid.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about a disposition of joy is that I believe it's still the month of Adar. And I know when the month of Adar starts, there's this tradition to say, it's Adar, and in the month of Adar, we're commanded to be happy. And I think it comes from the same place that you were talking about. But I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm realizing that after Purim ends, I don't usually hear hey, it's Adar, we've got to be happy floating around. And I'm curious, is that part of the tradition? It's only the first half of the month that you're commanded, or does it continue the whole month?
Who's asking the questions here, Amy? No, yes, that's a great point. That's an absolutely great point. You're right. Yeah. So we sing on the start of Adar. The Adar is a month where Purim happens. So it is supposed to be in the Adar. We say Mishe Niknas Adar. It's like a season of joy. And you're right. You are supposed to be happy throughout the entire month of Adar, not just till Purim. And there's no reason that we can't be happy in Nisan either, as well, just for the record. And as we do prepare for Passover, we know Passover as sort of the most common home holiday will be fraught with challenges this year. And how we, the traditions that we always seize upon, whether it's cooking or visiting or storytelling, will be challenged. But we will have Passover, and we will have Passover as a community, and Passover will be really beautiful. It will be very different. But the idea of we have the sacred Jewish calendar. And as we say that, there's nothing better than Shabbat, right? There's nothing better than Shabbat. And if people are nervous or have anxiety or are consuming themselves, the thing that I would most say is really let Shabbat into your life. Friday night, Saturday, turn off your phone, take a walk, call a neighbor, have a glass of wine, eat some challah. It's really the greatest gift that the Jewish people have. And we should seize Shabbat. It's like the Ahad Ha'am right? The more than the Jewish people have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. And I think that will be true during these times as well. Bethlehem will continue to stream, will continue to have Torah study. It will look different, but I think that would be one of the keys for us too. So.
You know, I'm reminded of one of my favorite texts. So I know you just asked me, hey Amy, what's one of your favorite texts? So one of my favorite texts is from Pirkei Avot, which teaches us, and it's somewhat well known. So I'm not revealing anything brand new here, but to find yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And that in some ways is kind of one of the things that guides my life. And just thinking about how in this moment, that can be a really powerful text, that so many people have an opportunity to do some learning that they wouldn't normally have done, that reaching out to and being part of a community and finding friends, and accepting those requests when they come our way, is really important. And then the third piece, we are commanded or obligated in that text to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm thinking about all of the parents of young children who are dealing with being at home, if they're blessed to be able to work from home, they're trying to work from home, and they've got their kids there. There's no parenting playbook for coronavirus. There's no childing playbook. If you have adult children and they're acting up in ways that you wish they weren't, or treating you in ways that you wish they weren't, there's no playbook for any of this. And while we know we want the best of our nature to come out, it's not going to all the time. And I think it's the same thing for our Bethlehem staff, you know, as a past president of the congregation, for our clergy and our staff. To Andy Chang, I see our congregation president, our board, they're working so hard to make decisions for this community and to serve this community. I think it's a really important time to think about giving people the benefit of the doubt. So, and that could be a spiritual practice in and of itself.
Amen. All right, we're going to begin to wrap up. If there's any specific questions, I invite everybody to put them in the chat field. If not, that's okay. I'll continue to, Bethlehem will continue to do different programming. Some of them will be, responding to the times, and some of them will be certainly just learning or Torah for the sake of learning and Torah. So if that's something that's important to you at any point, we'll do that. And it will be really wonderful.